All right. So again, welcome everybody to the first webinar on the Worker Protection Standard, How to Comply Overview for 2024. We will have 3 more of these, basically one each quarter for the remainder of 2024. If you know of somebody who is really interested in this information, but somehow was not able to attend, we invite you to pass this information along or direct them to the YouTube videos for their own reference. I do want to welcome my co-host, Gregorio Mendez Ortiga, who is with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. He will also be presenting some information as we go. I'll give him an opportunity to step in during the webinar if he has any additional comments to make. And yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. First, the Worker Protection Standard is a federal regulation that is through FIFRA and EPA, and Minnesota has adopted the WPS standard in whole. So if you have any other information just on the federal level, or if you've looked at the training resources or the other resources that we'll mention, or other ones that you may have gotten from other places, as long as it is the current WPS, it will apply in Minnesota. There may be some small exceptions, and I'll let Gregorio answer that toward the end. Here's my contact information. So I'm Jolene Warnke. I'm the program manager for the Pesticide Safety and Environmental Education Program. I specifically work with the commercial and non-commercial pesticide applicators, but I'm also sort of the WPS educator and resource connoisseur. You know, we have all the things in our office that we can send to you, and I'll let you know what those are and how you can get a copy of certain materials of your own. There's my email address and my phone number, and you're welcome to reach out to me at any point in time, whether or not it's the day we have webinars or any other time in between, if you have questions or need resources. First, this is what we're going to cover in this brief webinar. It's an overview of the WPS. Now, the WPS is a federal regulation. It's very hefty, it's very lengthy. We're really going to focus just on the highlights to help you determine whether or not the WPS applies to you, when it would apply to you, where to get your resources, and how do you have compliance assistance, and then what do you do if you need other information. This is the How to Comply manual that is available. Yes, it does say 2015, and that's because the How to Comply, or the WPS as a whole, was revised in 2015. And we are still trying to make sure that everybody understands what the new regulation is, and again, how to comply with that regulation and what the resources are. So it's not outdated. This is the current version of the WPS, and we can make this available to you. So again, have you received your free printed materials? I do have packets of information, which includes a hard copy of this How to Comply manual, along with posters and a flash drive that has all of the high resolution training videos on it, so that you don't have to download them. And if you would like a packet of information to be sent to you, all you have to do is email me with your mailing address, and then I'll get those out. I will tell you that I'm not in the office necessarily every day, so it may take me a week or so to get those in the mail, but I certainly will make sure that they get out as soon as possible. And then if you have any questions once you receive those, you can reach out to me or Gregorio for further explanation. The first thing we'd like to tackle is, when does the WPS apply? So there must be 3 conditions in place for the WPS to apply. First, it has to involve a WPS labeled pesticide product that contains the agricultural use requirements box or some other WPS reference. I have seen a label or two that does not have this pretty little box on it, but rather just has some text in the label that refers to the WPS. So most of the time it is this pretty little box that is clearly labeled agricultural use requirements, but there can be some exceptions to that. But if it does reference the WPS on the label, then it would apply. It must also be used on an agricultural establishment. And we'll go over what those are and when it would not apply in just a minute here. And it has to be directly related to the production of an agricultural plant. So we are not talking about livestock here. We're only talking about agricultural plants, but it does not necessarily have to be a row crop. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. So you do want to look for this agricultural use requirements box on the products that you're using. If you find it there, it may be this big, it may be smaller, it may be larger. Each one of these sections is specific to the product that you're handling. So the information that's included in this section may or may not be different between different products. So which products does the WPS apply to? You have to check the label. Here's an example of a label that has an agricultural use requirements box and a non-agricultural use requirements box. And that means that this product can be used on different types of sites. It might be an ag site or a non-ag site. And depending on which use you are using, you would follow the appropriate box. Any product that has a WPS reference on the label is when the WPS applies. And it doesn't matter whether it's general use, restricted use, a minimal use, organic or natural, or however else it might be classified. It's not limited to just restricted use pesticides like is often thought. It can be any product as long as you see this reference on the label. But it only applies when the product is being used on the agricultural site, even though it can be used on the non-ag sites. So here's an example. I pulled this. This is no endorsement for any particular product. It's just used for a teaching tool on label language. And this particular product is labeled for some agricultural use, but also some non-agricultural use. So if you're using this product on an agricultural establishment, you would need to follow the agricultural use box, which means you need to follow the WPS. But if you were using this same product on these highlighted areas, commercial landscape, interior scape, or turf, then the WPS does not apply. So again, you may have a product that can be used on different sites with a WPS reference on the label, but that WPS would only be in effect and you'd only have to follow that regulation if it's being used on an agricultural site. Now we're going to go through a series of questions for you to think through the process of whether or not the WPS applies to you in the work that you do or in your establishment's work. Do you work in any of these agricultural settings? My slide obviously is a little off here, but we're going to go through each one of these. So the first one is a row crop. So this is the easiest one that we often reference, corn, soybean, alfalfa, whatever, or alfalfa is not really a row crop, but it kind of is. So any of your field crops, those are considered agricultural settings. If this is on a sod farm, that is also an agricultural setting. If it's plant parts, flowers, seeds, or transplants, that is also included. If it is timber, where the trees are harvested or any part of the tree is harvested, including it's being used as a seed bank or needle collection, that is also considered an agricultural site. High tunnels, hoop houses, and greenhouses are considered to be agricultural sites. And then hay and alfalfa fields if it's being harvested. Now, if you just have grazing fields where livestock or animals can go out there and graze and you're not baling it in any way, then the WPS does not apply to that. But once it is harvested, it's considered an agricultural commodity and the WPS would apply. Here are some other unique agricultural establishments that the WPS would apply to. Family farms, even if, excuse me, only family members work on the establishment. There's been a longstanding myth that family farms are completely exempt from the WPS, and that's not the case. There are certain parts, and we'll have a review question about that a little later. Golf courses, if they're growing turf grass or they have a greenhouse or nursery that is producing plants for distribution on that golf course. So if they're growing their own turf grass to replace divots, or they're growing their own like landscape bushes or flowers or whatever to put in the golf course setting. The golf course is not covered, but the areas that they're growing the replacement plants is covered under WPS. University agricultural research facilities. So even though oftentimes they are using products in a deviated way, if it is labeled with WPS language, then it also applies to them. And then prison farms, because it is still an agricultural establishment. The next thing is, do you apply pesticides or employ anyone to apply pesticides in any of those settings? So do you have applicators? That's sort of our Minnesota word that we're using. Do you have applicators that go out there and make any types of applications? Does not have to be a spray. It doesn't have to be a boom like this, but it could be backpack sprayers, hand sprayers. It could be dry formulations, anything that is applied in an agricultural setting that is a pesticide product. Do you have anybody who does those applications? The next thing is do you operate a business in which you or your employees perform crop advisor tasks? They don't necessarily have to be CCAs, like certified crop advisors. But if you have delegated responsibilities where employees are going out to do crop advisor tasks on agricultural sites, then the WPS would apply. There are some exemptions for certified crop advisors, and we cover that in a later presentation, again, available on our YouTube channel. Do you hire or contract workers to do tasks related to crop production on or in any of those types of sites that we've already covered? So these would be people who are not directly applying pesticides, but they are doing some other type of work in those treated areas. They could be harvesting, they could be pruning, they could be seeding, they could just be doing weed management, any of those things. If they're not working directly with the pesticides, they are considered workers. And are they doing any work in those sites? So if you don't mind, if you could entertain the chat box for just a minute, I would like to know, now that we've covered some of the basics, do you think the WPS applies to you or your establishment that you're representing? And you could just put A, B, C, or D in the chat box. That'd be great. You can send it to everyone in the meeting, I think. You can send it to the host. I'm sorry, you can send it to the host. All right, so thanks for giving me some feedback. This always helps us as we're planning for future webinars and information exchange. And if you're still trying to find the chat box, it's usually in the black strip. And sometimes you have to move your mouse around your screen. It kind of disappears and then it will reappear when you move your mouse. And then there's like a little chat bubble that you can click in. And it's just like texting. You just click at the bottom, enter something and push the little airplane and it'll send me a response. And again, I really appreciate the feedback. It gives us a little bit of information to work for future events. So it looks like actually most of you are yes. There was a couple of sometimes. So let's keep going here. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the people who are involved. So the first part of it was the language on the label and the sites. Now we're going to talk about the people who are involved. And these are the four main people that the WPS refers to. And we'll go through each one of these to give the definition of what those people are and what they do. So what is a worker in the WPS? A pesticide worker is someone who is employed in the exchange for salary or wages or other monetary compensation and is doing tasks related to the production of those agricultural plants on the agricultural establishment. Excuse me, and that can include things like the harvesting, weeding, carrying or moving nursery stock, repotting plants, pruning, water, and irrigation. Now, keep in mind, the WPS doesn't kick in until there is a pesticide application. So if you have a fallow field that has no treatment and you're doing seeding and the seed is not treated, then the WPS has not kicked in yet. Once that first pesticide application has been complete, that's when the WPS kicks in. And again, it's not restrictive to just restricted use pesticides. So even if you are considered to be an organic establishment, if you're using any product, including your minerals or your biologicals, and it has a WPS reference on that label, then the WPS applies. So it's not just conventional pesticides. There are many other things that fall in this category. But a worker is somebody who's not doing anything with the pesticide themselves. They're just doing other tasks in that area related to the plants. Now, what is an early entry worker? So an early entry worker is someone who enters that treated area before the restricted entry interval has expired. And we refer to the restricted entry interval as an REI. It's always listed on the label in that agricultural use requirements box. It is for certain circumstances. It is not for routine work. So an early entry worker isn't just because you want to like get a good start on your day and you want to like send people in early to get going because, you know, the temperature's right or the conditions are right. It is not for routine work. It's really for like more of emergency situations. So you have an irrigation line that busts in the middle of the field and somebody needs to go and either shut it down or repair it. And that's during the REI. Individuals must be trained as handlers, which we'll talk about in just a minute, before they can enter. So they may be workers who, again, don't do anything with pesticides normally, but if they're having to enter during that REI, you now have to complete the handler training beforehand. No one can enter a treated site for 4 hours after an application, even if the REI on the label is listed as 0 or none. And I'll let Gregorio talk about that a little later. So what is a handler in WPS? So we already covered worker. A handler is somebody who actually does the pesticide application or works with the pesticide in some way. It can include the direct application to the agricultural plants. It can be that they're mixing, loading, preparing the equipment, filling tanks, working with rinseate, any of those things. It could be that they're cleaning the jugs or working with the used jugs that have had pesticides in them, even if they're clean. They could be acting as a support staff. In this case, it's like a ground flag for aerial application. If they're any part of that process, that would be a handler. Or they could be doing other tasks in that space that don't necessarily seem like they're handling pesticides, but they are. So for instance, this photo is they're doing some disinfecting in this greenhouse. So we don't think of disinfectants necessarily as pesticides, but they are actually labeled pesticides. And because they're working with pesticides in this space, doing other things, they're considered to be a handler. So who is responsible for implementing the WPS? We get this question a lot. Who is ultimately responsible? For a commercial pesticide handler employer, so that's like your commercial outfit that hires or that has staff that goes out and does pesticide applications for hire, it's the person or business who employs those handlers. So we call them applicators, you know, and applicator companies. But the commercial business that employs commercial applicators is the one who is responsible for those people. For if you're not a commercial outfit, then it's the agricultural employer. So if you have a large farm business and you have people who work on your farm and do all of these tasks, whether it's working with the pesticides or doing the work in the treated areas, then as the employer, you are responsible for providing and implementing the WPS. Here are some other requirements. The minimum age for handlers, so remember that's doing all of the tasks related to pesticides in agricultural settings, is 18. There are some exemptions for family-owned farms, and there's some very specific qualifications that have to be met, and that's outlined in the WPS manual. But for all intents and purposes, the minimum age for handlers is 18. And that doesn't matter, again, whether it's a restricted use pesticide, a general use, organic or natural. If it has that agricultural use box and that WPS reference on it, the minimum age for handlers is 18. The minimum age for early entry workers, so again, those are the individuals who are going into that site during that REI, is also 18. Workers, so those are the people who do the tasks not related to pesticides, cannot be asked to do any of those tasks unless they're trained as a handler first. So let's just say Bob is out sick today and you need someone to go in and assist with an application. And Julie is available, but she generally doesn't do those and she's only been trained as a worker. You have to complete the handler training first before Julie can go out and assist in those particular activities. We'll show you where those materials are. It doesn't take very long, so it's not like an all-day training, but there are some specific requirements that have to be met before that person can step into that role. So again, if you can entertain using the chat box for just a minute, are family farms exempt from complying with the WPS? And again, you can, if you'd like to throw in an A, B, C, D, this is sort of just a checkpoint to see if I need to do some further explanation, which I will anyway. All right, thank you for your participation again. So family farms are not exempt from complying with the WPS. However, there are some exemptions for family-owned farms within the WPS. And again, there's an entire section on this that outlines very specific things because it's not just a family farm. It's the ownership of the farm can play a role in that. And it's only for the family members themselves, not for employees or other people that work within that establishment. And so if that applies to you, if you consider yourself to be a family farm or family-owned farm, then I highly suggest that you read that section of the WPS so that you know who you need to provide protections for and what other exemptions you may have. And again, we have another webinar that has been pre-recorded available on our YouTube channel to help clarify a lot of these points as well. All right, so when is WPS specific training required? All workers must receive WPS specific training. So if they're doing any task within these treated areas, they have to receive the WPS specific training that is delegated through the resources that we'll show you. You can't create your own training. I mean, you can, but you'd have to have it approved by EPA first. And I don't really think most people want to do that. So we already have some materials that are ready to go right off the shelf to assist you in that, meeting that need. And we would appreciate that you use those materials so that all of our hard work doesn't go for nothing. And they're super easy to access and to use. Handlers have to receive WPS training if they're not certified applicators. So remember, a handler is, using something related to the product, whether it's the equipment, the containers, or they're making the application. In Minnesota, nobody who does applications, or I'm sorry, everybody who does applications has to be certified. If they are working in the commercial setting. If they are on a farm or private land, they only need it for restricted use pesticides. They only need a license or certification for restricted use pesticides. But if they are handling in some other way, then they have to go through training in the WPS. So if they're working with containers and on this in this capacity, then they have to be trained as handlers. There are some more, again, specific, outlines to when that applies. Minnesota regulation requires that any handler, again, for commercial use has to have a license. So that automatically qualifies them to not have to receive WPS specific training, although we do recommend it because there are some things in the WPS training that aren't talked about, when they take their study exams for licensing, that would be applicable. All right, so who can do this training? It could be a certified applicator. So again, if you already have licensed individuals in your facility, they can conduct the WPS training. They have to follow the rules of how it has to be done and use the right materials, but they can do that themselves. A state designated person, so that would be someone who represents, like the Department of Ag or the educational institution. Or let's say you don't have either of those people accessible to you, you can delegate somebody. This can be your HR person or a safety coordinator or your spouse, anybody that you feel is competent enough to take the online, right now it's an online train the trainer program, but they take the online train the trainer program and successful passing, and they get a little certificate that says they are qualified to conduct WPS training. And they can conduct that training for anybody. It doesn't have to be just within your own establishment, but then they can, provide services within your community if you have a co-op or something like that. So anybody can do that. They don't have to have any relationship to pesticide use or licensing or any of that. It can just be a person who's interested in doing that program. So one thing very, very important, and this was a significant change with the revision in 2015, is that there's no grace period for the training requirements, meaning that a person must be trained prior to conducting any of the work that's related to those treated areas or handling pesticides. The old rule allowed for like a 30-day grace period, but if we know anything about how some of the worker populations cycle through, they're there for a couple of weeks and then they move on to another farm. And so the training was not being conducted as effectively as it should have been. So this was definitely one of the changes they made. So again, grace period, there is no grace period before anybody works in those treated areas or handles pesticides. They have to receive this training. Now, if some of you are commercial handlers or you work for a commercial outfit, there are a couple of things that you have to do specifically that is part of the communication with the ag establishment. So as a commercial handler, you're hired to go do a job to make a pesticide application on somebody's property or at a farm. There is a communication stream that needs to occur there. You have to provide information about the application that's going to be conducted prior to the application being conducted. I know that common practices are somebody calls you up, says, I need this job done. You schedule it. You get out there, you do the application, then you send them an invoice with a summary of what was done. However, within the WPS, you have to relay a large part of that application information before the application is complete. And that's because that landowner, the agricultural employer, has to communicate certain things to the workers on their site, and they need that information ahead of time because they have to be prepared to present that information prior to the application being complete. But what does that look like? It's really a lot of the stuff that you're already collecting for your daily application records. It's this location and description of the area that you're treating, what the posting requirements are according to the label. So this is something slightly different than your daily records, but it's the date, the start time, estimated end time of your application. If there's any label requirements for protecting people during or after the application, the product name, the EPA registration number, the active ingredients, the REI. And then if for some reason there's a change, and again, the how to comply manual lays out specifically what that change might include, you have to relay that information to the ag employer. Again, beforehand. So let's just say your start time was scheduled for 7 a.m. Now there's some inversions out there. You'd like to wait until 10 a.m. before you get out there. You need to relay that information to them so that they can make sure that their workers are not in the area, that they have an estimated time of when that application might be done, because that's when the REI starts. Whether or not they are ready to do the postings or close off roads or do whatever it is that they need to do to fulfill their requirements. So you need to relay any of those changes ahead of time. So that's, as a commercial handler, that's what you need to do, or commercial outfit. They also need to tell you some information. So maybe it's pest season and they've got a lot of things going on their property and they have multiple fields that have been treated. They need to let you know where those areas are, whether or not there's any restrictions entering those areas. So do they have posting signs out that they're under an REI? And then also, are there any treated areas that are under an REI that the handler may be walking in or around within a quarter mile of? Now, they only have to account for their own properties. They don't have to go survey the neighboring properties and ask them. But they do need to relay any of this information. And that, again, is to protect the commercial outfit that comes in. So here's another tidbit. And again, we have a more thorough presentation on the AEZ in another presentation available on the YouTube channel. But the AEZ is known as the application exclusion zone. All applicators, so all handlers operating any type of application equipment, must ensure that no people are contacted by the application. When an application is occurring, the AEZ moves with the piece of equipment. No one can be in the AEZ during this time. If an applicator encounters a person in this space, they have to pause the application until they can assure that there will be no contact with that person. I do have a little video, but I'm going to wait until the end of the presentation to show it so that I can switch screens. But I'll demonstrate what this AEZ looks like related to the equipment moving around the field and what happens if you encounter a person. So where will you find more information about all of these topics? First and foremost, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture offers training materials and they do compliance assistance. You can reach out to Gregorio if you are interested in having a compliance assistance inspection. He'll come out and help you navigate through this difficult regulation and to ensure that everybody on your property is in the know of what needs to be done. You can also reach out to my program. We have training materials. We can also do some training assistance and we can answer with general questions. We generally do not tackle the compliance. We don't have inspection checklists or anything like that. That's all through the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. So you would want to reach out to Gregorio for those things. But we can provide a lot of information and help digest some of the how to comply information that's in the book. They did a really nice job with the book. It's written in pretty plain language, but that doesn't mean there aren't some tricky spots, or you may read it in one section and it look a little different in another section and need some clarifications, and we can certainly help you with that. But most importantly, you'll want to access all of those EPA materials that I've been referencing for training or posters, or some other things. And that's going to be on the PERC website. So I'm going to put this in the chat box. I think it's .com. It might be .org. I'll put it both ways, because now I'm questioning it. But it's the PERC website. PERC stands for Pesticide Education Resource Collaborative. They have an arsenal, a repository of all of the training materials that you can use. They do have some industry specific trainings. I think they have one for mushrooms, for vegetables, for forestry, for greenhouse. So you don't have to use the generic training material, which is for like all ag. There are a few that were for specific industries. There's something called the compliance library. So if you're not sure if the WPS applies to the situation that you're in, you can answer a series of questions and it will funnel you through, letting you know whether or not the WPS would apply in that particular situation or under those conditions. And then they just have a lot of general information about the WPS, but also about training resources. Again, the train the trainer option is listed on that website as well, and other materials that you may want as supplements, like respiratory guides, if you have to wear respirators, or other types of things related to the WPS. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Gregorio, and he'll talk to you from the MDA standpoint on the support. He did put his information in the chat box, and I have a slide at the very end that has both of our contact information on there as well. But I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and let Gregorio take over.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. There is a lot of information that you have presented. Very good, very well. I understand that I learned some things yet from your presentation. So, yeah, but Gregorio Mendez Ortega is my name with Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the coordinator for the Worker Protection Standard. I put my contact information in the chat box, so you can give me a call or send me an email if you're interested in scheduling compliance assistant inspection. These inspections are not enforcement driven. So this is where we're gonna walk through your establishment, your farm, your business, and then we'll be checking out things, how the compliance with the worker protection standards and maybe other MDA regulations are, and we'll give you any tips or information that might help you to keep in compliance or bring something into compliance. So don't hesitate to give me a call. We can schedule that all around the state. There are different areas in which different inspectors are assigned to, and probably that inspector is the one that is going to be visiting you in case that you want a compliance assistance inspection. The slide that is you're seeing right now on the screen, that when we talk about the pesticide safety information, and the pesticide safety information is what it needs to be displayed at a central location. Usually we refer to that as the poster. There is a poster that has that information, provided that is specific and it is those topics that might be addressed. And they are addressed very well on those posters. That's why we recommend to have that the way to convey the information, because it's using it in writing, different languages, pictorial, so then it can be understood by the different in different ways. This information with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is what you need to also provide to your workers in order for them to know where to call or to send any complaint that they might have, or they also can ask questions, so they can call us directly. That is the phone number for a complaint line, and they can call anytime, leave messages. If somebody's there, 8 to 5, it will be answered the phone. But this is the information that must be also provided as the agency regulating the pesticides here in the state. If you have any specific question, I will advise to have it at the end, so then we can address that, or you also they can send me an email or give me a call, and we can address the particular question that you might have for your establishment as well. Other than that, there is not much that I can add to what you already have said, Jolene. I just wanted to make some comments on what it is the family farm. When the worker protection standard does not use that terminology of family farm, what it is used is the immediate family member. And that is what you were referring to, what the family members that are exempt from some of the regulations, but not all of them. So thinking of the family farm, it does not apply here with the worker protection standard. It is the family member. And the family member, the immediate family, it covers a large group, everybody up to first cousins from both sides. So this is a large list of the people that could be exempt from some of the regulations, not all of them. And the other one is with the REI. When there is not an REI listed on the label, the minimum per the regulation, it is 4 hours before entering to that particular field or area. And the reason being is that because they're giving time for the product to dry, to have this time for the workers be safe, not to enter there and start or be in contact with some pesticide residue that might be still fresh there. This is not going to be a one-time deal because they are working in and out of the establishment and day in, day out. This is a situation in which they are constantly going to be in contact or could be in contact with that with a pesticide. So that is why the 4 hours, the REI, if there is not an REI listed on the label. Uh, those are the notes that I have here that you want me to address. So is there any questions? Yes, maybe we can save it for the end.
All right, thanks, Gregorio. Yes, I'll move through a couple of informational slides. And then again, like I said, we'll stop the recording and allow people to ask questions if you did not want to be in the recorded version of the webinar. And let's see. So the generic MDA website address is here. So it's mda.state.mn.us. And there is a wealth of information on this website as far as if you are looking to get a pesticide certification for commercial or non-commercial. There's some information about the private applicator program, but most of that is actually housed on the PSEE website on the University of Minnesota. But they also have information about how to handle pesticide waste, how to clean containers, the disposal program, the waste pesticide disposal program. There's record keeping forms. I mean, there's just, a wealth of information on this website that can help assist you in other ways of pesticide management. So check out that website as well. And then again, I mentioned that we have topic presentations also available on our YouTube channel. So this is the YouTube link to our channel. And then when you get there, you'll see WPS, Worker Protection Standard, on the bottom. You'll need to click View Full Playlist in order to see all the different topics. But we hosted these last year, and we have broken down kind of the major chapters and had a 30 or so minute webinar for each of those. So you can take those at your leisure. And again, you can always reach out to Gregorio or me if you have additional questions. Yes, and I can put that link in the chat box for everyone. I will get right back to that. Let's see here. It is, doesn't let me copy, so give me just a brief moment here. All right, there you go for the YouTube. Hopefully that works. And then finally, here is our contact information for you to note or take a screenshot of. And with that, I want to thank everybody for being here today and for participating in our questions. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can answer any questions that you may have.